All right. Well, welcome everyone to another installment of our Black Lives Matter book discussion series. Today we are discussing Swing Time by Zadie Smith. And I just wanted to go around and quickly introduce ourselves so folks know who's speaking. My name is Elizabeth and I am a librarian at AADL.
I'm Colin. I'm the Kids and Families lead here at AADL.
I'm Emily. I'm a librarian here at AADL.
My name is Marissa. I am a outreach tech.
And my name is Jacob, where I'm also an outreach tech.
And I'm Beth, and I am what I call the outreach team tech person.
I'm Lucy, and I am a library tech in the youth department.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here. We were just talking before we started that this was a bit of a hefty read. Some of us were up late finishing, but I'm excited to talk about it. And I was hoping that someone could just start us off by giving a kind of short summary of the book. It kind of jumps around and there's a lot happening. So best, do the best you can, and other folks can jump into as needed.
Okay, I will. So it takes a good chunk takes place in London and in West Africa and in New York. And it begins with, so it's a story of a couple of biracial young girls who meet in dance class, and then kind of a little bit of mainly one's trajectory and their family. And also the West African part is she ends up working for a big rock star who starts a school in West Africa and, super famous. So there's a lot of jumping around between young, her youth and current and places, which was a little confusing at times.
Like Beth said, it wasn't just we started early and went late, or even started late and then went early. It was jumping between one and another, and there were not always cues. It didn't say the year at the top of the chapter or anything like that. So you just kind of had to be a good reader and pay attention and realize that, oh, here we've moved forward and moved backwards. But I found as a reader that kept me paying closer attention. And it was interesting to see how mysteries unraveled, because just as you were starting to get a little more and get really invested in something, you got bounced back or forward to another area, which I liked, but I can understand why other people would find it frustrating.
Yeah, that sums it up. But can I just say about this book that because of the jumping around, at times I felt like I was really slogging through, but other times I was like really engaged. But I was telling Jacob this, I looked at Wikipedia to make sure I got the story straight. And the first thing it says was the narrator, who does not have a name. And I was like, what? She does have a name. And I was just like, no, she does not have a name. How did I not catch that? I was really sort of disappointed in myself for not catching that. I don't know why, but just like I felt like she deserved more than being nameless. So
I do think. Oh yeah, go ahead, Colin.
It's interesting because like she has so much to say and so much like a strong point of view about things, and she sees kind of behind the scenes so much, but she also is dependent on these other strong women in her life. Like they make all the choices. Her life is attached to them, or how she thinks they would feel about a thing. So her childhood is attached to the strong personality and her friend Tracy, who makes all the decisions, and she goes along with it. Even if she's frustrated or upset about it, she still is like, well, I'm not the decision maker. That's okay with me. And then she, later in life is hired by a rock star who, of course, her personality is in charge of everything. And that's fine with the narrator. So yeah, her sense of self is diminished because all choices are taken by others, and her mother as well. I mean, that's another power dynamic in there.
Yeah. I think she's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. So she says right in the beginning, I think, like, I live a shadow life, where she talks about living in the shadows. And then that's something that comes up again with other characters in the end. But I do think that that's interesting. She is just sort of a shadow, but also a mirror, like this reflection. She's just showing us the story of other people's lives. I did feel like having the narrator unnamed, for me personally, made it one thing about this book that I found a little bit hard to grasp, like get a hold of. It seemed a little bit, she seemed a little bit nebulous at times. Like I didn't have a sense of her personality. I didn't have a sense of that. We didn't know her name. And I think that's intentional, but at times I felt like I wanted to be attached to her more.
Yeah, I was actually going to say pretty much the same point as Lucy. I had even written down that quote because I really thought it kind of summarized the narrator. I've always tried to attach myself to the light of other people. Because yeah, she like seems like a very beige, not very special character in a lot of ways. Like she has a lot of opinions, but she doesn't really seem that, like, who is she? What is she? Like she has opinions, but she also doesn't seem to be that memorable.
And I
Yeah.
think that really jived when she was with Tracy as a younger adult. That makes sense to me. I think that that's what younger people do. They're nebulous, trying to figure stuff out, and try on different identities and all this stuff. But as she got older, I'm like, girl, what are we doing here? But I think maybe that's the point. I had a lot of those moments reading this book where I go, maybe that's the point. But also there's something going on with the main character and the history of dance. And she's talking about how she feels like a shadow. She's watching this Fred Astaire clip where Fred Astaire's in blackface, and then there's like, he's dancing with shadows. And she's like, watching this is a transcendent moment for me. I like left my body and like felt transcendent. And I'm like, well, what's that all about? What does that mean to this character who is very nebulous and doesn't can be difficult to pin down? So there's something going on there too.
I think I had a somewhat different relationship to the narrator. And I think it's because I listened to it as an audiobook. And so by just the nature of an audiobook, you have someone giving a character. And the audiobook narrator was very good. And so I think that gave a little more personality and connection to our unnamed narrator, who I did not put together was unnamed until very close to the end of the book, when the mother is going on and on about her helper, Alan Pennington, and she keeps saying the full name. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, not only is the mother, she seems to value her relationships with almost everyone but her daughter more. But she's, in all the conversations, we never even heard her call her daughter by her name. And here she is. I mean, don't get me wrong, hospice care is very hard work, and Alan Pennington deserves all of the honors. But the fact that he got this full name that was said so many times that I still remember it without going back and referencing, and our poor narrator neither was given a name or has made one for herself, kind of like you were saying, Jacob.
That's
There's an
very
interesting,
yeah.
there's an interesting dynamic with time in the book. It's called Swing Time, and it swings back and forth from different times. And she makes lots of references about time, which I just thought was interesting. Like when she, first, one of the things I noticed was she said this: the fundamental skill of all mothers is the management of time. And then she makes lots of other references throughout, like when she gets to Africa and time moves differently. And she's watching a film later on in college where all the different tribes all over the world are experiencing time differently. Yeah, I found that really interesting because I was trying to find out like exactly what we're getting at. Like it's an interesting concept. And I was like, but so what are we saying with that?
Well, and like the dance part is interesting to me because you know, the narrator and Tracy grow up in this dance class, but like neither of them are really end up being particularly good or notable dancers, right? Especially the narrator after childhood just kind of drops off dancing, and you know, she's still quite interested in dance, and like, you know, that's definitely a theme throughout the book, is these kind of very detailed scenes of either live dances that she sees in Africa or video clips that she watches. There's these like super detailed scenes, but I found it kind of interesting because like she doesn't really like, she's not personally interested in continuing to dance or really having that a part of her life, you know. And even Tracy, who is allegedly like better, like performs in a few shows, but it's not it doesn't end up being like her career or anything either. So I like honestly found the like whole dance part a little beyond me, because it seemed like it could have been anything that they were interested in, you know? Like, and I thought it was interesting that Zadie Smith chose dance, but it didn't, like, I think the story, they could have been fascinated by like something else too, kind of. I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but I found that kind of interesting because it doesn't actually end up really mattering to either the narrator or Tracy's life. And even the rock star Amy, like she does choreograph dance, but like she's a rock star, so don't they all? I don't know. I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Okay, yeah, I put my thinker on it. The exact question you're asking, what is this business about dance? And these are some things that I stumbled across, and I would be eager to hear what you guys think, if it's baloney or not. So like Tracy dances. The main character just thinks about dancing and studies dancing while Tracy does the dancing. There's something with dancing and blackness that is being discussed in this book. And I don't know why the blackface doesn't bother the main character. She seeks it out rather, and is interested by it, and calls her friend over to watch it and says, look at this amazing stuff. So there's something to do with the history of dance and blackness.
Yeah,
And
well,
there's something to do with history and time as well. That's the spaghetti I'm throwing at the wall. I wonder what will stick.
What I threw at my wall is that's also about like copies of copies of copies, where like the history of dance, like this dancer did this move, but really they stole that move from this person, which is like this dance. And so like the narrator's this like shadow person who also kind of molds herself to whoever she's with. So like she's kind of just copying other people in a lot of ways. And like Amy's obviously then like she's copying, but because she's white, it's more of like the conversation of cultural appropriation, where she's like, well, but I'm an artist, so I should be allowed to steal whatever I want to steal. And even her like photography exhibit was just pictures of other photographs of people. I don't know, there's something there, but I don't know if I fully.
well, yeah, I mean, a lot of these, obviously, these dances and a lot of the rhythms and the beats and the movements came from Africa, right? That's where it all started. And that's where it's all been adapted from. But who gets the credit for it? It's the newest person who's doing it. But it really just goes back, right? And so does the narrator. She goes back to where dance originated and sees some of the most, you know, and it sees it in its undistilled form and it's pure. And then all the way through her good friend Tracy, who's doing it, but oblivious to where it came from. It's just natural. It just comes out of her. And then to Amy, who as a you know, a white rock star, just gets to use it and for fame and riches, and it's fine. But yeah, but she sees where it really came from. And I think that's the story kind of blackness too.
Yeah, to piggyback on that a little bit, Colin, and also what you were saying, Jacob, about the blackface piece, like it is interesting that she is seeking out this, you know, like this dance in a musical theater setting, almost that seems very white, but that to make the connection from like the West African dance she sees there to the dance she's seeing on the white people dancing on the stage. And like blackface would have been, you know, that minstrelsy and the whole you know, like blackface in this country was somewhere where all those dances were sort of introduced, and then you know, people would watch white people dressed as Black people do the dances and accept it that way. But so I think that there's something like that piece about the Black faces. I think it makes kind of a connection. I also thought it was interesting how it seems like the narrator studies dance but doesn't dance, and you know, we assume that Tracy has this innate ability, but then at the end, when the narrator's dancing in West Africa, she just sort of gets in there, she looks at what they're doing, she feels what they're doing, and she does it. And I thought that that was like characteristic of her, in that she is always kind of doing what other people are doing, but at the same time it seemed to me that it was very, her ability to dance was actually much more innate than she ever allowed herself to think it was. Maybe she never, she just doesn't have like an identity of her own. So I thought that moment was really interesting. I'm not really sure I'm making any points there, but
Oh, you
touching
made
on
a lot
all
of them.
I was thinking of that part too, when, as I read it and she started to dance in Africa, what I thought of was like, when you like to dance, you just dance, you know, like I do anyway. And like when you hear music and beats, and like I just couldn't imagine her considering herself a dancer, yet only being able to observe these dances while in Africa, where everyone would be dancing. And then like, because she was it took courage for her to finally get up and do it, and they were surprised that she was dancing. And in my head I was like, well dang, if I had been there, I would have been dancing the whole time. Just so I don't know what that means, just that maybe because of her sense of, or lack of sense of self, she wasn't comfortable. It just was hard for me to wrap my head around it, because like I said, if you really like to, then you do.
Well, but it was also a risk because of her relationship with Amy. So like thinking back to when it was her birthday and they went out to that karaoke bar and she sang, and of course that was her talent. They started in the book letting us know when she was very young that she was a very good singer, but you know, the dance didn't carry her, and Tracy felt threatened by her being a good singer, but not nearly as threatened as Amy did. And goodness knows, you know, there are very few times in this book where our narrator takes that risk. And then of course, the times that she does, it usually backfires for her.
Yeah, anytime she stands out as an individual, it's like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't do that. And quite often you read about her tapping her foot or moving her feet along with the beat, like wanting to dance, but not doing it as she sees others doing it. Now, another thing I noticed, as she's a studier of dance and a studier of old time musicals and things, I liked this line where she said about, you know, old musicals and black and white tops and tails instead of the modern pop music. She said, but elegance attracted me. I like the way it hid pain.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that has a lot to say. And she's living in two worlds, right? She's got a white dad and a black mother. And so she doesn't, it seems that she's pulled in two different directions sometimes.
Plus the way her mom is, you know, compared to other moms, and her mom's identity as to, you know, being more of an intellectual, that kind of stuff. I think she felt not a part of the rest of the group, but being biracial and mom being the way she was, which is like most Ann Arbor moms, to be honest with you. But anyway.
I would have loved the opportunity, though it wouldn't have fit naturally in this book, to get a little bit from the mom's perspective, because while we saw her, you know, almost neglect of her daughter in some ways, at the same time, she was pushing not to be defined by motherhood and to not give up on her aspirations because she had this daughter. She's a really complicated character. The parts that she was in were the parts of the book that I was always, oh, well, I gotta keep going here to learn more about it. And I'd just be curious of hearing more from that character.
Yeah.
Well, and I think like the narrator thought of herself as kind of neglected, but like I didn't read it that way. Like the mom is the one marching into the like parent teacher conference, you know, asking about things and like encouraging her daughter to get into a better school, and really kind of advocating for the narrator in a lot of ways, but like it's just not stuff the narrator wanted, you know. And so there's this friction. And in my mind, I was reading like I read that the mom did want the best for the narrator and kind of was trying to help with that in her own way, but like it didn't mesh with the narrator. Like their personalities are so different that the narrator, they just clashed, you know.
I
like,
felt that she
yeah.
was, I felt the mom was just eager to fight injustice wherever it may be. And so really she wanted to be left alone to do her own thing and would leave the narrator alone all the time until an injustice happened. And then she would jump in and defend her like crazy, whether she was right or wrong. I mean, whether, you know, the birthday scene where they had an inappropriate dance in negligee, it was a 10-year-old. And rather than scold the kids, she leaped to their defense, right? Or later in when she's a council person, I think, and there was like these kids had pushed other kids off the bridge and they died. And she took, rather than feel bad for the victims who died, she immediately took the side of the other kids who pushed them off and was like, they're just kids and you're ruining their whole lives just because of this one terrible moment. So she reacts very quickly to defend, but also is oblivious sometimes to her own kid.
I thought the mom was like maybe the most compelling character, who I also wanted more of her. But I also thought it was just really interesting how this book sort of talked about motherhood, and it seemed like it was just this looming threat of being burdened by children, that like the mom kind of felt burdened that she wanted to study and like didn't really enjoy doing like the mom things. And like Tracy stops working because she has kids. Like her mom loved her. They had a different relationship, but like Tracy stops working because of the kids. Her friend Haba, is that her friend, who like they kind of have this inside joke about like, do you have any kids yet? Nope, me neither. Like, great. Even though her friend is like 10 years younger than her. But it's just kind of this like understanding that kids would kind of like take over your life in a way that they didn't necessarily seem to want. And like the baby that Amy ends up buying, like that the parents seemed fine selling their baby, that I don't know if that was strictly economic or, you know, they didn't really like talk much about it, but just how like really the only one who seemed fully unburdened by her children was Amy, who was like obviously super wealthy and had nannies raising her kids. So
Right. That's what I was thinking, was that privilege. She had the privilege of having kids, taking them wherever she goes, buying another one, you know. So when you're looking at the different aspects of motherhood, you know, there was definitely that privilege thing happening.
And I thought that Amy and the mother existed on the same line, just at different ends of it. Everything the mother does in how she observes the world is through the lens of the political. And Amy is above politics. If Amy wants to build a school in Africa, she builds a school in Africa. If Amy, you know, wants a child, she gets a child. When she goes to Africa, she goes, everybody loves me, but they're really just clapping for the big car and the big shiny, you know, all the stuff. She lives completely outside of the realm of justice and politics. And so I thought that was an interesting, I was like, the same coin, different sides, which is always fun as a reader to be like, ooh. And this brings me back to another where I go, well, maybe that's the point, which happened a lot.
Well, and I think you could say too that almost Tracy is on that same line. She just does what she wants, you know, and obviously, like, you know, she knows who she is and she's confident in that, as are the mom and as is Amy, which is like so opposite from the narrator, right? The narrator is always just, you know, as we've said, following other people, you know, questioning her decisions, et cetera, et cetera. And like, I think it's these like very strong women, for better or for worse, that like really kind of emphasize how that the narrator gravitates towards to just live, you know, in their shadow, or is forced to in the case of her mom, you know, because that's her mom's raising her. So
I think the narrator's also like while she's always sort of grasping onto someone else's life or doing what she's told by someone else, she's also judgmental though of everybody without, it's almost like this well, it's an internal resentment, I think. And so maybe she realizes that she's not ever able to be her own person, but she just is constantly judging everyone. And even to the like, you see her go to Tracy's apartment later when Tracy is a mother, and I think she's kind of, you know, she's like judging Tracy's life as these kids, and but then Tracy sits down and has this lunch with her kids where they're all kind of joking around, and the narrator's like, oh, wait a minute, you know. And even like the last line of the book is about, you know, Tracy dancing, but I think it's, and Fernando calls her out, I think, on being judgmental, but, and that's when I really thought about it. I'm like, yeah, she does, she kind of judges everybody, but she doesn't make any changes based on that, really. She just, the way she ends up disrupting is really like it's underhanded, you know. I mean, I'm not saying she shouldn't have done it, like I'm not saying she's always in the wrong, it's just she's just we always, and maybe it's because we're only ever hearing from her, but maybe, you know, anyone inside their mind is that judgmental.
Well, and listening to you talk, Lucy, and this is probably obvious to you all, but it just hit me that here we are at the end of this book, and all of the people who she was kind of being controlled by, whether it was the people doing the controlling or not, she has been released from. She's not connected to Amy anymore. She doesn't, her mother is no longer there. What is she going to do? She's at this point where she has this freedom, whether she wants it or not. It's an interesting place for the book to end.
Going back to something what Lucy said about how judgmental she was, I was also thinking a lot about just how like privilege and wealth kind of like let her be so judgmental, or like allow her the comfort and complacency to like be so judgmental of, like, her mom puts her in her place multiple times of saying like, well, you had a really easy life, like you actually don't know what poverty is. You see it, but like you're an outsider, you don't really understand it. Like different people at different points really put her in her place of calling her out, but like because she spends so much time with Amy in these like very extravagant wealthy spaces, it kind of like enables her to think that she deserves that, or like she has it because of something that like allows her to judge. Just like they seem connected in my mind.
Quite often she's in Ghana and she's like, well, these people, because of manners, would never ever eat and before me, but I'm just starving and I can't last that long, so I had to eat, so they served me, you know. It's like, wow, okay.
Yeah, she was pretty callous. One of the things though, we were talking about Tracy, I was wondering what was with the menacing part of Tracy and harassing the mom, and you know, that just, I didn't really understand
Well,
what that was playing in the story.
I think with
except that
Tracy,
she-
her whole personality and life was geared towards dance and making it famous. She didn't get a formal education. She didn't do anything else other than this trajectory, and it didn't work out. So she always directed her anger at others throughout the book, right? It's always someone else's fault, or she'd be spiteful, or if the narrator had something good in her life, she immediately would react and with scorn, or with change the subject, or something upsetting, right? So her whole life didn't really work out. She's got these wonderful kids, but that's not what she really wanted with life. So she's lashing out.
I thought I agree with Colin, but I was also confused, Beth, because it's kind of at first presented like, oh no, like Tracy has really gone off the deep end. She's like sort of unhinged, like but then when the narrator goes over to her little apartment, like she doesn't actually seem really crazy. Like she's raising the kids, she's providing for them. Like they don't have very much money, but like she's interacting with them. She's having regular conversations. Like she doesn't seem like she's unwell mentally.
Right.
So I couldn't quite get, but like the wild number of emails and like the kind of vitriol that she expresses, like that is not really like a sane thing to do. So I didn't get that. I was like, is she crazy or not? I don't understand. And like maybe, you know, I don't know. I was confused by that. And I do agree with Count's point, but I still couldn't quite latch on to like the ultimate point of like, is she unwell? I mean, maybe she's not. Maybe she like, I don't know. I was confused,
Yeah.
obviously.
Remember that one time when, so she is in the West End theater and they decide, oh, you got extended through spring and everyone's partying. And the narrator is like, oh, by the way, I also got a job. That's my good news. And she was like, you're going to leave in the middle of this? And there's, yeah, and so it's fine. But then the next morning she wakes up and gets a letter about her father and a blow-up doll. And she's like, I don't know whether to believe this really. And they just leave it at that. So it was like, wait, was that real? Or did she make that up just to kind of pop her balloon and ruin it for her because she had good news and it's not about you, it's about me.
Yeah, I knew that was bull. I mean, that she just made that up. But yeah, now that you mentioned like all the emails and stuff, like she was probably just trying to get to the narrator, right? And upset the narrator more so by attacking her mom. Possibly.
She also has a point, like the narrator admits that like her, the volume and like the personal, like it's the mom's fault. Certainly that's like the weird part, but like other than that, like the narrator admits that like her complaints are all valid. It's like the state has failed education of Black children. The state isn't keeping up with these public housing units when they're keeping up with these ones where certain people live. Like she had valid points, which I think is the interesting point of like, which made me be also confused about like what is this whole thing supposed to like mean?
Well, maybe this is just hitting me now with our conversation, but because even in her youth, it was our narrator's mother who kind of fought for her, thinking about that birthday party that kind of ended poorly. So if the only person she has who she can think of who has fought for these issues of injustice is not taking on your issues of injustice, especially because Tracy does have a sense of importance. And, you know, part of it with being over email, it's a lot easier to be awful over email. You don't think as much about the person on the other side. And so as much as I, like you, Elizabeth, was a little surprised to just see how casual and normal Tracy seemed with her family. You know, there's a piece of that. She also probably wants the narrator to think that she has a wonderful life. And yes, I'm not dancing right now, but look at my wonderful children. We're doing just fine. And yes, we are eating lasagna again, but we're all going to laugh about it together. Part of that could be a bit of a show too. Tracy was interesting.
You know, what you're saying about email, Emily, it's making me think while we're having this whole conversation about Tracy and where she has shown the most vitriol. It's like this letter slid under the door, these emails to the mother. And I think the narrator mentions that she realizes this is even a pattern with Tracy. Like Tracy's made complaints to a lot of different people, but there's an ability to be brave in writing, right? Because you just like put it down and you put it out there and it's gone. And it's also a really good outlet for like any anger and resentment that you're harboring and holding on to. So I do think it's possible that somebody could be saying these really horrible things through email and through letters and then not show that in their outward life. I think that probably happens actually all the time, you know, like just online exchanges but I didn't really think about that until we were talking about all the ways that Tracy directly expresses her anger towards people.
And I think the relationship between Tracy and the narrator and their families, I perceived it as kind of a commentary on how the world exists in a way that causes people who are not wealthy to be at odds with one another. And even though the families are friends, they're in direct competition with each other. And as much as they're friends, they're mean to each other. And there's a set of unspoken rules. Tracy's not going to show up. Well, she kind of does sometimes show up and cuss you out. That would be breaking the rules. That would be acting out of line. That would be taking a loss in the competition with the Joneses, if you will. So I think what the rules dictate is that you can write a letter, slip it under the door, which is different than direct conflict, which would be some sort of sign of being not classy. Because they're all trying to fake different, like Tracy's family might not be the most wealthy, but they have a million toys and fancy clothes. And that causes the narrator's family to judge them and go, that's gross and silly and stupid. So I think as much as they're friends, they're also not friends at all. And they're actually just like mean to each other. And it has to do with how they exist in the class system globally, not even just in the UK. That's how I made sense of that, or that was my attempt at making sense. Maybe that's the point.
Yeah, I had thought about that a lot. Like they start out very similar, right? They each have one parent who's white and one parent who's black. So like they look similar, they have similar interests, they become friends, they bond, and then like through different life circumstances, they end up in totally different spaces. And just how like tricky class is to navigate.
Yeah, there's a lot of class throughout the whole book. There's even class in Ghana and class in America and class in the theater, and kind of just the struggle that's throughout the whole book. They talk about that quite often.
Mhm.
And
I did
Hawa-
want, oh, go ahead, Jacob. That's what I was gonna talk about, actually. I was gonna say, I wanted to touch a little more on Hawa before we talk about the end of the book, because she's also a pretty central character that I feel like we haven't talked about too much. And I found her to be very interesting. And I think there's a lot to explore there. So I don't know, were you gonna talk about her, Jacob?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that Hawa in Lamine, or I don't know how to say his name properly. They attempt to explain to the narrator that like there's a million different kinds of wealthy and you are poor. Like money is not what makes you wealthy. And also Hawa says, not directly to the narrator, just directly like next to the narrator, oh, we love Granger because he really feels us with his heart. And some people come to Africa and try to feel us with their brain.
Mhm.
And I was like, that's the narrator to a T. Like that's like Nawa or Hawa bullseye.
Yeah.
I think in general, this book is a really sophisticated critique on development aid in general. And I think Hawa like really is like kind of the voice of that, along with these other characters like Granger, who like are trying to do the best they can, basically, of just these people come in who are not at all qualified. Like the narrator has zero qualifications to be doing this. Amy has nothing but money to offer. And it's like sadly very realistic of like a lot of development aid and how it runs. And the locals don't have any power, so they're sort of like tied to whatever strings the money comes with, even though they try to gently push things in certain ways. Like when Amy kind of gets in her brain of like, every girl is going to get a laptop, and they're like, okay, sure. There's a lot there that I found very interesting.
Yeah, I
there's,
just thought that was interesting too. Sorry, I
I was
thought
gonna
it
say
was
it's like on a local level, then it's Fern who takes some of the funds that Amy is sending to do whatever she thinks is going to be great for the school. He's allocating them to things that actually make practical sense and keep families at the school, like a garden and like religious education. So it is like that totally misguided sense of this, like I'm helping because I'm just throwing money at them and laptops and things like that. But none of it has a practical use in the sense that Amy wants it to be. It's really performative for her, I think,
Yeah, we're going to have sexual education class and every girl's going to get that and have a safe place. And you're like, well, yeah, that's a great idea. But do you know how hard it was? We had to be so intricate to talk to each family to make them feel comfortable with just this much. If we can't just suddenly talk about sex in this community like that. And she's just completely oblivious because she's like, why not? This is what I want.
Yeah, Amy was not particularly likable to me.
She's totally believable though, because these amazing
Pretty sure
superstars who get to live in their own world and do whatever they want, and those personalities that are like, no, this is the way it is because this is what I say.
Or even how they treated the mother who, her and her partner, I forget her partner's name, but like they raised very valid concerns about like you're giving money basically to this dictator government who's like bad. And they were just like, why is your mother making this hard? Like, get your mom out of here, basically. And then like Hawa really, like her arc kind of really illustrates just the complicated nature of like geopolitics of she's raised in the village, she maybe has certain expectations, there's other religious group, she kind of goes there, but then the family's upset and it's just like complicated, and we get a very small window into it that's never fully explained because I don't think the narrator understands.
Well, and Hawa, like, she loved living in the village to a certain extent, right? Like, she loved all the gossip and the fun and like the community, but then it's impossible to leave unless you basically like get married and like have a husband who's gonna like help you get out. And so she kind of, I think, that's what she settled on doing because she was like, well, I don't want to be here my whole life. Like, even though I do like it, like, I don't want to be one of like many wives to someone. I don't want to have like a bunch of babies and like, live in this poverty. But there wasn't really a choice except to kind of smother her own personality and join this other like kind of religious group so that she could get out. And like, that was her reality.
Yeah, all the men leave. It's just young men in the village and that's it, and women. And she didn't really I didn't think she necessarily wanted to leave, but there's no opportunities for her to do for anything.
Right.
She just easily says, no, he's a wonderful person. He's very ugly, but he's very kind. And she does, like you said, have to smother her whole personality. No more dancing, no more having fun, no more singing, no more eating good food, like all of the things. It's like, but that's fine. She's completely fine. And the narrator's awestruck, like, what are you doing? How could you possibly make this choice? We got to talk you out of it. She's like, what? Why would you talk me out of this?
Yeah.
And she says, are you happy? Right. And they're like, oh, how American of you. That's not what it's about.
Right. So I do want to talk about the end of the book. Everything kind of, comes crashing down around the narrator for a couple different reasons. And I'm interested in people's thoughts on that and what you thought at the end. We talked a little bit about how, like, finally the very end, the narrator actually is kind of alone and doesn't have someone to shadow. We don't know what she ends up doing or how that goes for her. But yeah, I just wanted to hear thoughts on the end.
I thought it was an interesting decision to start with the end in the prologue. And the name Lamin is so unusual that when he re-entered, I was like, wait, but that's the guy at the end. And so I felt like there was a build up to how do we get to this place where we know she's not getting phone calls and emails anymore because she's not with Amy. And here's this other character who comes in who seems to be with romantically. And it felt like all the threads coming together, but it didn't have, sometimes when those threads come together, you feel that narrative satisfaction. And I don't know that I got that from this. And I don't know if it's just because I was still rooting for our narrator the whole time, even though she was not always making the decisions I would make. And so I wanted something more.
Yeah, it was super interesting because all her, like you guys were saying earlier, all her connections to all the people in her life that made up her character, they're all gone now. They're doing their own thing, and she's completely untethered. She has no place, she has no home, she has no money, she has no plan. Anyone that's like Fern, who professed his love earlier, probably because she was the nearest person that was connected to him. He's no longer interested. Lemmian is not interested. So she's just like this untethered thing. It's very interesting. But then she goes to see Tracy, and so the question is, what is she going to see Tracy for? What is she going to do? She kind of has an epiphany, it sounds like, right? And she decides to go. And you're like, but what was the epiphany? Are you going to help Tracy with her kids? Are you going to be connected to a family? I don't know.
I got the sense that she was going to try to just help, you know, and be a
Oh, we're frozen.
Uh-oh, Beth froze.
person that her mom had encouraged her to. Oh, were you in there? Did you get me?
Yep, you're
okay.
good.
Did you? Okay. Yeah. So the mom had encouraged her. I think she was even saying adopt them, but so she may have been extending an olive branch to be, and the kids were like, they liked her too. The kid, you know, they were interested in her being there when she visited. So they were intrigued by this person. But it was still like, I immediately read the prologue at the end, and then so I was still it was a little fuzzy about the chronology exactly, like which part was the very end, the prologue or the part at the when she goes to see Tracy.
I think that's the very, very end. So I think the prologue is like right post getting fired. And because she's like, I can't go out of my room. I can't go down to the lobby. I can't, because she's, or right after she's, or maybe right after the tape of her dancing has been released, you know, something where she's now become this face in the news as well. You know, like she revealed all this information and made other people's news public, and then it sort of came back to her too.
So that was lost on me. Why did it, like, because they were like in like lingerie when they were so young? Is that why it was so bad?
And I guess suggestive.
Okay.
I don't, and that too was like something when I read in Wikipedia, like, oh, okay, then it all came back to me. It was the one at the birthday party, but otherwise that came out. Still, I think
That seemed a little, I didn't quite,
Yeah.
I mean, there's like, they were so like, I don't know. In my mind, I was like, they're just kids. Like, is really the internet going to freak out that much about that? Like, there's kids doing all sorts of stuff, but maybe I didn't understand what the video like actually was. That was a little lost on me.
Yeah. Plus, like, who filmed it? Like, when it happened,
One of the other friends.
No, I think Tracy filmed it.
Oh,
and made
Tracy
them
filmed
do
it, and then she kept it all that time.
Yeah.
Tracy wasn't in it. She had them do it.
Right. That's right. Okay. Yep.
Aren't they doing I'm just realizing, aren't they doing a dance of Amy's?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I just put that together. I was like, wait a minute. So yeah, I mean, controversial, but right, where'd it come from? So
This is also 2008, so there were fewer videos of kids doing dumb things online. So that may play a part too. We're more jaded now, a decade and a half later.
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
The other thing that I was just putting together was that something that Beth said, that the narrator kind of has this fantasy moment of thinking about going and helping with Tracy's kids. And sort of, I think she does even use the word, like, I could adopt them, like they could be my children, like I will raise them, I will help raise them or whatever, which like is another mirror to Amy. Like the straw that broke the camel's back was that Amy bought this baby, and now the narrator's like, but I could like take care of these other children. Like it's just another mirror moment.
Yeah.
So what did you like the book? Would you recommend it? What was the kind of final, were you glad you read it? I always like to hear what people kind of like their takeaway is after finishing one of our discussion books.
I don't read contemporary adult fiction like this. So I enjoyed this reading experience for that reason. I was engaging with something completely new and something that works in a way that I'm not familiar with. So it was fun to look at and go, how does this all work down here in this, intricate box of a book? I think parts of it were funny, and I enjoyed those parts. I think that there were certain parts where I was compelled by what the characters did and said and who the characters are. And I think that there's some parts of the book that I didn't feel that at all. So it's like I hopscotched or I leapfrogged over the parts where I was like, okay, it's your thoughts, it's your ideas. There's a lot of ideas and thoughts. And sometimes that's the point of books. I don't engage with those books very often, though. So
Yeah,
I enjoyed it.
it shined a light on so many different details of life and aspects that, as a white person, I don't see every day, right? And from her travels to Ghana and London, and just like every single new paragraph, some of the paragraphs were this long, would be about like a different point, but a lot of it had to do with power, class, with her relationships and with time. So it was really interesting. However, it was also really, you've got the epilogue where like, ooh, something happened. And then 450 pages later, you've got, or the prologue, and then you got the epilogue. And in between, you're like, it's just like everyday life. There's not like, and then this happened, and then it goes here. It's just like, well, I had this party as a kid, and then I got a job when I'm an adult, and then I go back. So it wasn't really like a story to me. So it was a little harder.
Yeah, I read this book when it first came out, and then when we picked it for this, I was like, oh, I don't remember it very much, and I think when I was reading it again, I was like, I can see maybe why I didn't remember it, because there are these big pieces of like, you're kind of like, all right, well, what's going on? But then I also got so much more out of it. And now, like, I think when you finish it, you're kind of like, oh, and even discussing it with everyone, I'm like, God, there's so much packed in that book. How could I have forgotten it? But I think maybe it's like my brain didn't even know what to hold on to. So it became a book I read, but I'm so glad that I like took the time to revisit it, because there's just so much that's touched on in this book. So I liked it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Similarly, I think I really liked it for this discussion. I think there's a difference when you read a book and you know that you, first of all, are going to discuss it. I think we take a little more time and start thinking about some of those big ideas, especially with these book discussions where you're talking it with other people who have finished the book or at least read most of it and have thought about it. It's a good book to discuss with thoughtful readers. And I think if folks have book clubs where they are book clubs that are more than the wine and the snacks, this would be a great option. And this is the first Zadie Smith I've read, and I liked her writing enough that I want to explore something else. And I think if this book were not told with the interesting time jumps, it would have lost me more. I think almost that puzzle of trying to figure out where we are and where does this fit in and why did the author choose this moment to jump made those parts where less was happening more interesting to me. So also that's a long way to say I liked the book and I'm definitely glad I read it.
I have to jump in and suggest that you read White Teeth,
Okay.
which is her first novel. If anyone here hasn't read it and they liked Zadie Smith's writing, I would say that she wrote that when she was like 20 years old, and it's just it's phenomenal for how well it's written, and the story just really carries you along. So, and it's not first person narrated. So,
White Teeth.
White Teeth. It was her very first novel. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say I'm glad I read it, and it definitely made it for a good discussion. Yeah, and I'm curious about White Teeth now.
I think it should sort of be required reading for anyone interested in development work. And yeah, I loved discussing it. I think it's a great discussion book, but I did not particularly enjoy the actual reading part of this.
Yeah, I felt similarly. I thought it was hard for me to get through a lot, the long paragraphs. And like I did at several points be like, nothing has actually really happened. This is just like the story of, this is just a life story. But then there were I thought all the things that took place in West Africa were fascinating. And I struggled because I found very few of the characters likable. So that's always hard for me. I like to read books about people I like. So that was a little tough, but I thought, Zadie Smith is a great writer, and I thought that I enjoyed reading her writing. Yeah, so we are pretty much out of time. Thank you so much, everyone, for reading it and participating in the discussion. And we have another Black Lives Matter book discussion coming up. And I have here, I just want to note what it's on because I wrote it down. Now, of course, it won't load. On Babel 17. So that is coming up next. So if you are interested, you can tune in for that. And thanks everyone for being here today.